You know, Guts has a lot of nicknames. The Struggler, the Branded Swordsman, the 100-Man Slayer, Isidro's role model, anime's greatest Giga Chad, you get the idea. But the nickname that most appropriately describes him, at least in our opinion, is the Black Swordsman. See, Berserk is a story intense enough to break anyone's mind. It's certainly had that effect on a number of Twitter users, and the mental toll that has been extracted from Guts' psyche is enough to pull an impoverished nation out of debt and then some. Sure, the reason we like him so much is precisely because he still manages to stand on his own 2 feet and swing around Dragon Slayer like an absolute Kenshi maniac, but his battle prowess has always been a double-edged blade. On one side is his deep desire to protect those he loves and to define his own humanity, like Casca, Shirke, Barnase, Serpico, Isidro, Puck, and the rest of the gang. But the other edge of that blade is gushing with blood and malice like an open wound that refuses to heal. And that side is the Black Swordsman. Explore. A master swordsman with a masterless blade gains guidance and loses it just as quickly. Guts' life as a mercenary swordsman. You guys have heard that iconic line from The Killing Joke where the Joker claims that all it takes is one bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy, right? Well, it turns out it holds true for most fictional characters, except for Guts. Well, it does apply to him, but not in the sense that a single bad day is what broke him mentally. Guts is a guy who has had to endure a lot growing up, and even that is putting it mildly. He was born from a literal corpse, was raised by a heartless mercenary that wanted him dead and only kept him around because he was useful, and has lived his entire life wandering from one battlefield to the next. He's seen more death than most, and that is part of the reason why he also excels at escaping from it. Skull Knight once told Guts that the reason he keeps surviving through insurmountable odds is because he was born from death's womb, referring to his mother's corpse. And so Guts has pretty much always been marked with death in some way, shape, or form. But from the moment of his birth up until the moment the eclipse happened, Guts was always wielding his sword for someone else's sake without quite knowing what he himself wanted from life. First, it was for Gambino's acknowledgement. Then it was for pure survival. Then he met the Band of the Falcon and made friends for the first time in his life, and his goal became helping Griffith realize his dream. Throughout his early years, Guts was an efficient killer, no doubt, but he always had this sense of purpose and brooding about him that lent a likable air to his character. Yes, he's sort of a mindless killing machine, but he has morals, and will shed more than a few tears when he accidentally kills a child during an assassination mission. Griffith, of course, would never show such feeble emotions, and the news of Adonis's death alongside his actual target, Julius, doesn't even faze him. But hey, we have the power of hindsight, and Guts' foresight has always been an issue for him. After leaving the Band of the Falcon and embarking on a year-long self-imposed peregrination to find a purpose and a dream that he could call his own, Guts realized that he had always been walking the path of the sword, but now he wanted to perfect it. His battles with Adon Coberwaltz, Griffith, General Bosscoin, heck, even the miraculous one-man stand that earned him his nickname of the 100-Man Slayer, they were all fought for different reasons overtly, but the underlying theme that connects them all is Guts' desire to become the strongest swordsman of his time. When he fought Adon the first time, he was ticked off after realizing Griffith, the man he so looked up to, didn't even see him as a friend. He wanted to prove himself as an equal, and the only way he knew how to do that was to keep swinging his sword at Adon's head until he forgot why he was angry. He also did it to protect Casca, but their relationship only blossomed after this encounter, so that becomes sort of secondary. With Bosscone, Guts knew of the Purple Rhino Knight's fierce reputation and savored every minute of his epic battle with the hulking brute. He even ate his own pride and borrowed Nosferatu Zod's cleaving sword to land the finishing blow on Bosscone, but that also could have just been Guts following Griffith's orders. With the Knight, he became a 100-Man Slayer. Sure, Guts did it for Casca that time, but he also wanted to prove to himself that he could withstand seemingly impossible odds and still come out on top. Guts has been compared to a feral blade many times in the series, swinging boldly and wildly at anything and everything that approaches his path. But through these trials and tribulations, by having something more precious than himself that he wanted to protect and see thrive, Guts found himself being forged into a master swordsman with no parallel, at least in all of Midland. When we see Guts partake in the only tournament in Berserk, bafflingly enough, he easily defeats Salat, a warrior with a fighting style completely unfamiliar to him, without even needing to swing his sword half a dozen times. When he returns to assist his now outlawed comrades against Salat once more, he resoundingly defeats the Bakiraka prince to the point where he forces him to go back to his own training and reevaluate his stance on how he should be fighting. Guts had been swinging a sword since he was 6 years old, but only after doing it for nearly a decade and a half did he find any meaning in it. After living with Godot for a year, he realized that his dream was a simple one. He wanted to fight stronger opponents and test himself as much as possible. Guts was a master swordsman who learned his craft without a master, but by the time he reached the tourney that we spoke of, he was probably the most skilled swordsman in all the land. All of this was only possible because he had Griffith guiding him in the back of his mind, as his goal was to one day stand beside the White Falcon as a friend, not as a troop. He was still tangling with opponents that, while skilled, were not exactly stronger than him. Guts is pretty much the strongest human fighter that we've ever seen in Berserk, so what's stronger than the strongest human? You guessed it, an apostle. And it's with those nasty reincarnated human devils that the genesis of the Black Swordsman takes place. It's the culmination of a lifetime of bad days, and not just a single one. How Guts becomes the Black Swordsman. In the Black Swordsman arc, the titular Black Swordsman was able to dispatch of 3 apostles and a pseudo-apostle with relative ease. Sure, he broke a few ribs and limbs in the process, but overall he looked like he could hold his own against them rather well. In his first fight against Zod, however, which was also his first ever encounter with an apostle, Guts was immediately overwhelmed by Zod's inhuman presence and could only do the bare minimum. After getting knocked about from pillar to pillar like a rag doll, Guts resolved to stake everything on a single strike against the Immortal One. His opponent sensed this, though, and welcomed the challenge. And Guts even managed to win the exchange by slicing through the Immortal One's sword and burying his own in the latter's shoulder. But he was fighting the proverbial god of the battlefield in his base form. Once Zod transformed, it was game over for Guts, and had Griffith not intervened, Berserk would have ended in Chapter 5. But this was before he fought and killed 100 knights in a single encounter, and after going through 3 years of hell on the battlefield under the White Falcon's banner, Guts had become a living weapon himself. His second canonical encounter with an apostle was with Wild, and this time Guts fared much better against his inhuman opponent. Not only was Guts able to shrug off getting knocked down by a literal tree as if it was a small nap, he also took down Wild single-handedly, which is a hugely impressive accomplishment in and of itself. But perhaps the greatest example of Guts' progress as a swordsman, and indeed as a person, comes from his fights with Griffith. In their first 2 encounters, Guts didn't know himself, didn't know what he wanted, and didn't know how to get it either. All he knew was how to swing a sword and stay alive. Griffith utterly crushed him twice, once by nearly killing him with a fatal stab, and again by dislocating his shoulder after hopping up on his sword to knock him off his game. Both times, Griffith deftly outmaneuvered Guts and achieved what he had set out to achieve at the beginning of those encounters: absolute victory. Guts didn't join the Band of the Falcon because he was out of a job after killing the Grey Knight Bazuso. He joined up because he lost a wager to Griffith, and his payment was becoming his newest sworn blade. In the next 3 years, Guts grew exponentially as a fighter, becoming a decoy for entire battalions and engaging dozens of enemies head-on and surviving. While Griffith got busier with the political affairs that were necessary for achieving his dream, Guts remained in the trenches, and after that night of 100 nights, he became the pinnacle of swordsmanship in Berserk. This is why when he fought Griffith in round 3, he was able to break the latter's sword in half and walk off with no hesitation, because Guts had finally found himself and his true purpose. The year he spent on the road was a journey of self-discovery, but also self-realization. He realized that he did care about his comrades, and he did miss them when he returned to save the now outlawed Band of the Falcon from bounty hunters. He realized he loved Casca and consummated his relationship with her before setting off to rescue their mutual leader. When Guts met Griffith in the Tower of Rebirth, he broke down, not just because of the state of Griffith, but also because he blamed himself in that moment. When he was leaving the Band of the Falcon, Guts assured himself that Guts would get over this loss, take it in stride, and keep soaring ever higher because he didn't think he was worth the drama. He couldn't have predicted that Griffith would crumple like wet tissue and get himself thrown into a dungeon for seducing the princess, thereby committing treason. Guts resolved himself to rescuing Griffith and staying by his side till he recovered enough, but it was pretty clear that there was no going back for the White Falcon after Chapter 49. Griffith had already committed himself to the idea of either killing himself or killing everyone else he knew and loved, and he chose the latter during the eclipse. Don't get us wrong, he did try to do the former, but causality made him slip and choose the latter. matter. Before the eclipse, Guts had been fighting mostly human opponents, with a monster showing up once in a while to give him the fight of his life and help him evolve into his next best version as a fighter. However, during the eclipse, he was forced to take on hordes and hordes of apostles by himself, armed with nothing but a horn that he chopped off of one of those freaks. Initially, Guts had managed to keep himself together as he barked defiance at the God Hand and claimed Griffith would never willingly choose to become one of them. Then, Griffith betrayed him, and as the truth of the situation sank into his very guts, pun intended, the 100-Man Slayer began transforming into the absolute beast that we know today as the Black Swordsman. A berserker rage overtook him, and he managed to take down multiple apostles with him as he tried to get away from them all at the same time. Guts wasn't fighting to survive anymore, he was fighting to kill. He wanted to destroy the apostles if it was the last thing he did, and more than anything else, he wanted to kill Griffith. This wasn't his immediate thought, as he was killing and dodging apostles like a video game character. At first, he was only thinking about killing apostles and saving Casca. But then Griffith, in his reborn form as Femto, violated Casca right in front of him and forced Guts to watch. Our hero ended up sacrificing an arm and an eye in an attempt to stop this heinous act from being perpetrated on the love of his life, but he simply didn't have the power to do so. Guts lay helpless as Femto finished with Casca and tossed her aside like a used rag, and when he woke up in Godot's mind 4 days later, something had clearly changed within him. Or rather, Guts had finally become himself again. You see, Berserk opens with the Black Swordsman arc, which takes place 2 years after the eclipse. One of the biggest reasons for its success is the edgy nihilist that Guts was portrayed as in the Prelude arc. Throwing caution to the wind was normal for him. He relished pain, and he was simply not afraid of dying, because to him, that would be more worthless than not living life how you want to, as he would most likely be killed by an inhuman apostle. We understand why he is that way when he wakes up post-eclipse and we see Guts just run. He runs until his feet cannot carry him forward anymore, thinking about all the horrors that had transpired in his life in one single day, and the man who was behind it all. He collapses and cries like a child because he thinks that he has lost everything. The fact is, he had nothing, found something irreplaceable, and then left it willingly to go chase his own selfish ideals. Guts had always had a problem with understanding where his priorities should lie, and they had now come back to break his mind. He declares war on all of demonkind, packs Dragonslayer for the job, and strides out of Godot's hut being pushed forward by pure rage and anguish. And this is the genesis of the Black Swordsman. Over the course of the 2 years between Guts leaving his blacksmith host and surfacing at the city of Koka in the Black Swordsman arc, he dispatches of numerous apostles along the way. It becomes clear that he no longer kills to protect, he kills to destroy. During the arc itself, Guts shows no remorse for blowing stuff up and causing civilian casualties because, in his mind, anyone who can't protect themselves doesn't deserve to live in the first place. He calls nice people ants and says that he likes crushing those ants underneath his boot because they tend to get in his way. The way he fights becomes more reckless, almost as if the only thing he lives for is killing apostles. While his purpose might be noble on the surface, the process of actually doing so multiple times over has already been established as sheer insanity by us pretty well in this video, we think. You have to be about as crazy as an apostle, if not crazier, in order to chase them down and hunt them like dogs. But that is just what Guts was doing when we first met him. Everything he had experienced since birth, being betrayed by the man he thought was his father, being sold by him for 3 coins, having to face death on the field of battle every day as a mercenary, and then everything that happened with Griffith, and especially everything that had happened during the eclipse, it all coalesced into one giant ball of pain, fear, rage, bloodlust, and borderline psychopathy that resulted in Guts becoming the Black Swordsman. He became an unstoppable force of pure death as he marched from village to village, town to town, sniffing out apostles with his brand of sacrifice. He turns a literal sacrificial mark into a homing device and somehow manages to survive final boss fights for 2 full years before meeting Puck. And even after meeting Puck, Guts doesn't exactly change immediately. He refuses to call Puck by his name for the first several weeks of their association, preferring to call him Bug instead, and also treating him like one on occasion. There is a good reason why the Lost Children arc from Berserk might never get adapted. His rampage through Rosine's pseudo-apostles and final encounter with the elf apostle herself proved that he was still just as off his rocker as in his Black Swordsman arc days, if not worse. That image of Guts with his eyes glazed over, the intestine of a deformed pseudo-apostle clamped between his jaws, is haunting, to say the least. Many Berserk readers argue that it was right after this and the conviction arc that Berserk stopped feeling like Berserk, because Miura rolled back the intensely gory and violence-filled imagery of his story and replaced it with glorious artwork filled with falcons and witches. He also made Guts tamer in comparison to what he was during the first 3 arcs of Berserk, turning him into what they perceive to be a more stereotypical manga protagonist. But we think that this isn't true, because in our opinion, Guts and the Black Swordsman are 2 separate entities. Guts, by himself, is an accomplished master swordsman already, but he always fought for the sake of those he perceived to be important to him, whether he realized it or not. The Black Swordsman, meanwhile, is consumed by a single-minded mission to kill every apostle he encounters in his path as stepping stones towards his ultimate target, Griffith. This malevolent obsession with killing Griffith takes Guts to some pretty dark places, as we saw him kinda go crazy with the Slug Count's head after having the apostle cornered and then relishing the pain he felt in battle and wearing it as a badge of honor. But where it started to become an issue for him was when he came back in contact with the one thing that still represented his humanity, Casca. When Guts was reunited with Casca after her escape from Godot's mine, he resolved to protect her from everything harmful, no matter the cost. But he failed to consider that he himself might be someone she would need protection from. This gets even worse when he receives the Berserker armor, because then you can see his Black Swordsman persona given shape and voice in the form of the Beast of Darkness. We'll speak more on this in another video soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and turn the notification bell to always. But suffice it to say that Berserker Guts is Guts Unleashed, and it's looking like that is going to be the only thing capable of even inflicting damage upon Griffith anymore, let alone killing him. Guts has already tried to stand up to his mortal enemy after the latter's incarnation twice, and both times he was left feeling utterly defeated. The second time even more so, because Guts consciously suppressed the Berserker armor's influence on him and chose his cool-headed swordsman skills to take revenge on Griffith, and they ended up failing him. Guts had reverted to his Band of the Falcon self with his new crew of Shirke, Isidro, Farnace, Serpico, Ivalira, Puck, and Casca. He once again had people he could call his comrades, and something he wanted to protect. He was able to keep himself in check pretty well, all things considered. But now, it appears as though there is nothing to hold him back. Chapter 373 ended with perhaps the most ominous cliffhanger in Berserk history, as we saw Guts get taunted by his Beast of Darkness for his weakness. At the same time, the Seahorse is being boarded by Kushan slavers who have no idea what they're up against because 3 of them decided to kick down the door of the cabin Guts was spiraling in. And the chapter ends with a chilling image of Guts lying face first on the floorboards, Dragon Slayer in hand, and the faint silhouette of the Berserker armor creeping up to take him over from underneath his cape. For fans of the hardcore side of Berserk, it seems like the Black Swordsman is set to make his comeback. But whether it will be as a savior or as a ravager, only time can tell. Marvelous verdict. But for now, this is where we're gonna have to end the video. The Black Swordsman isn't just another nickname that Guts picks up along the way on his epic journey of self-discovery and destructive violence. It's almost like the yang to his usual yin. Guts is clearly dealing with a lot of harrowing thoughts and emotions, all at the same time, often sleep-deprived and in the heat of battle. It only makes sense that he has a side to him that wants to fiercely protect everything he loves and stands for, and that he also has a side to him that just wants to burn everything to the ground. That other side is the Black Swordsman, in our opinion, but having said that, we'd love to hear yours. Let us know what you think in the comments section down below, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep struggling, fellow strugglers.